Welcome. I'm Pamela D Wilson, caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker. I am down here at the corner of the slides. You will find me down here throughout these presentations. Welcome to Managing Emotions, Family Relationships, and Elderly Parents Who Refuse Help. In this part, we'll be talking about why families don't get along. You might think that's a silly question to ask, but when families get back together after leaving the parental home for a number of years, sometimes all of those things that were issues when we were younger come back and they cause issues in families. Let's get started. We'll go through the normal housekeeping. I will take myself off the camera, and by now, hopefully you can repeat the housekeeping steps with me. Let's get started. As you know, I use the term elderly parent or elderly parents for the person for whom you are caring. The outline for this module is in the course materials for the programs. Please do print out the slides so that you can take notes and follow along. The ellipses, which are those dots in the slides, I put them in there on purpose so that you can follow along with me. The objectives of working with family members who don't get along, you should be able to, by the end of this, be able to express how family relationships change over time that result in relationships that can be a little bit rocky. Summarize relationship traps so that you can moderate responses for positive outcomes. Identify how generational issues, sibling rivalry, and self-interested brothers and sisters can result in more complicated family situations. And last but not least, identify potential problems for family disagreement so that you can create proactive plans to avoid legal issues. In this part specifically, we'll talk about why families don't get along. By the end of this, you should be able to identify how childhood relationships affect the way that we care for elderly parents. You should be able to recognize how perceptions about aging parents may be a little faulty and respond positively to relationship glitches. We grow up and we leave the homes of our parents. At some point, because of caregiving, we come back together because one or both elderly parents need care. Sibling rivalries that existed in childhood resurface, they come up again. Disagreements or blame from childhood years can dominate these conversations. You might be shocked. When we separate and move away from family when we're younger, all of these issues go away because we don't have as much contact with our brothers or sisters, or we have the ability to control how much contact we do have. When we return to the family home, we're all there. All of those sibling rivalries and disagreements come up again. Then we have generational issues that exist in families, and these are mostly based on age span and perspectives of adult children. In my family, and I'll turn on the camera to share this story, but in my family, there were 6 of us children. I was the youngest, but I was born 9 years after the brothers and sisters above me, who actually were twins. My oldest brother was 17 years older than I was. If you can imagine, I didn't meet him for the first time until I was almost 5 years old, because he left Omaha, Nebraska, where we were born, and he went into the Marines, and he didn't come back until his tour of service was finished. So when he came home wanting to greet me as the baby, I was scared to death. I didn't know who this man was. And I didn't react very positively to meeting him the first time. And throughout his life, he always tried to make up for that. Because of that gap of 17 years, every child in my family had a different relationship with my parents. If you think about it, and you think about how you yourself have changed in the past 20 years, Or look at the span between the oldest child and the youngest child in your family. How you've changed between those years and how you've grown. When we think of our parents, they experience the same type of growth. They experience the same type of changes. So when they're raising children, and maybe there's a gap of a couple years between children, or in my family in particular, 17 years before my brother and I, our experience of our parents is very different. If you asked any of my brothers and sisters about my parents, they would tell you a different story, and you would probably wonder if we were all in the same family because our experiences were so different. My experience of my parents was that I was very lucky and that I had the best parents in the world. I often tell people that I won the parent lottery because I had such good parents. And I'll talk about them throughout these programs. You'll hear me talk about my mom and dad who have been gone. My mother's been gone for about 25 years now. My father, almost 20. So let's get back to the slides. Let's talk about birth order, because this is another interesting aspect of families, and it might help you understand how to have better relationships with your brothers or sisters that you may have not seen for some time. According to some research about birth order, and this research was from an article by Jocelyn Vu, firstborn children usually receive a lot of attention because they are the first child. Parents are so excited about having a baby. They have a lot to learn to do about raising a child. And with the first child, they may be a little more attentive. They may be more, oh, we have to stick to the rules. We have to stick to these guidelines. As a result, that firstborn child wants to excel at everything they do. Firstborns are generally reliable, conscientious, structured, cautious, controlling, and achievers. They are usually more educated than their brothers or sisters, and they're very quick to take charge. Who is the firstborn in your family? Think of that sibling. It may be you. Does any of this sound familiar? Middle children. And middle children, there could be multiple middle children to differing degrees. There are many in my family. Middle children are easier going because they have to fit in between the oldest and the youngest child. Trying to fit in can make them rely more on friendships and be less tied to the family than other brothers and sisters. Middle children can also be people pleasers, be somewhat rebellious, and some want to be the peacemaker. Then we have the youngest child, who is often called the baby. The youngest child can take on different personality traits. One is enjoying being pampered and avoiding taking on responsibilities. The opposite is to become a super performer to try to keep up with everybody else. Other personality traits of the youngest child include being fun-loving, outgoing, self-centered, uncomplicated, or manipulative. The neat thing, in my opinion, about realizing how birth order affects personality is that when siblings get together to care for elderly parents, we need a little bit of all of these traits, firstborn, middle children, and the baby, to succeed. In looking at caregiving roles and responsibilities and why siblings won't help with elderly parents, we will have serious discussions within the family. Caregivers also need a lot of laughter and playfulness in this mix to balance the work that has to be done and the seriousness of the situation. We all have beliefs and perceptions of our parents. I don't know about you, but I thought my parents knew everything that I knew. It wasn't evident to me until my mother passed away that my thinking was a little bit faulty. My thinking was faulty because I didn't take into consideration that my parents grew up differently than I did. I know that sounds silly. My parents grew up in the 1920s, 1930s. And In that time, my mother was very responsible. Her mother had passed away when she was 5. So she was working and taking care of brothers and sisters. She didn't finish high school. She went till I think the 3rd year and then didn't finish because she went to work. My father finished high school and he went into the conservation corps in Nebraska, and then he went into the U.S. Army. My mother and my father had really good habits in raising us, and I always felt that my mother knew how to manage money. She was the one who paid the bills, wrote the checks, took care of all that. Made a budget. We would go to the grocery store. She would know what she was going to spend. So my assumption was that my mom knew how to manage money. When my mother passed away and left my father behind, I was the executor of the estate. And I went back home and I started looking through bank accounts and checkbooks and all of that. And what I realized was that my mother didn't know how to balance a checkbook. You know, the page on your statement on the back with the little boxes that say put in the beginning balance and the checks you wrote in the ending balance, that was never filled out. What I noticed, though, was that my mother knew that when her bank account balance got so low, she needed to transfer more money in. That was a revelation to me, and I actually felt really pretty horrible. I helped my parents with their income taxes all the years that they had to do them. I never thought to offer to my mom to help her balance the checkbook every month, because that was a habit that I had because of her, believe it or not, because I thought that she knew how to manage money. I was very adamant about balancing my checkbook every month to the penny. Honestly, if I was off by pennies, I was looking for why I was off. And I set budgets for myself. I knew what my monthly income was. I knew what my bills were. I knew what I had to spend. I was very adamant about saving money. All of this because of the way that I perceived my mother to be and my parents to be, which was a great perception because I learned a lot and it taught me a lot of good habits. But I also learned that there were so many things I could have helped them with had I known they didn't know. My advice to you as adult children are not to assume that your parents know things that you know, because you may have finished high school, you may have a college education, you may have advanced degrees, you may work in a very specialized industry. You could be a doctor or a nurse or a CPA or an attorney. You may have specialized skills that could benefit your elderly parents. Offer to share them in a nice way. Mom or Dad, I do this for myself. Can I help you with that? Or I'm working on this for myself. How about I jump in and help you with it? You would be surprised the things that you will learn about your elderly parents. So let's now talk about second marriages and blended families, which can cause significant issues. The changing scope of family life results in families who may not have smooth relationships. I would have so many families come to my office to talk about caregiving situations for their elderly parents, and they would be apologetic. They would say, "Oh, we're so sorry. We don't all get along," or "You're never going to believe this." Because I had been doing this for 20 years, there were a few situations that actually surprised me. And being in the role of a court-appointed guardian, I worked with families who never got along, so I was used to it. Blending second marriages, stepmothers, stepfathers, stepchildren can bring out the differences in lifestyles, opinions, and bring up complications that were never expected or discussed. Imagine what happens when second marriage parents need care, and the children from either side of the family have to work together, even though they may not like each other. They may show favoritism for one parent over the other, which would be natural. You would show favoritism for your parent versus the spouse that your parent married. These disagreements have the potential to divide marriages, and they do result in unexpected legal and court battles that we'll talk about later in these parts. Let's begin, though, by talking about habits and behaviors that cause significant issues when families come together to care for an elderly parent. These behaviors may have been with us since childhood. We learn behaviors after moving out of the home, through interacting with friends, and in the workplace. I call this one elderly parent traps. Elderly parents can act in helpless mode, making adult children feel more sympathetic or guilty about a situation. If an elderly parent takes a "oh, poor me" attitude and makes situations or issues larger than life, you may be responding to a parent who has felt helpless all of their life or who feels like a victim. Parents who appear helpless or exhibit other behaviors may be having difficulty responding to changes happening in their lives. It's similar to when we were children and we had a normal way of doing things, and all of a sudden, mom or dad said, "Oh, we're going to do it differently. We're going to change how we do this." And as children, if you could imagine, we probably didn't react very positively to that change because we liked things the way they were. It's similar with elderly parents. When your parents need care or when you're trying to help, they may refuse to participate, they may be argumentative, they may be acting in a way that you have never seen them act before in your entire life. We do have to remember, though, all parents have a right to make bad choices. They can refuse to work with us. They can refuse to change or improve a situation. As the caregiver, if you're in one of these difficult parent situations or elderly parent traps, know that you're doing a good job. You're really doing all that you can. Think about this. If a statement or an action by your elderly parent sets off your emotions, realize that that is an emotional trigger for you. You want to look at the trigger and determine what behavior it's triggering. Is it triggering? Do you feel insulted? Do you feel unsafe? Does it make you feel angry? Does it make you feel unappreciated? Think of what that triggers in you, what that statement or action by your elderly parent triggers in you, and refuse to be triggered, refuse to be baited. The best way to respond, and this takes a little bit of learning on our parts, is to remain calm, remain neutral, and remain matter of fact. Because if your parent realizes that their attempts to bait you won't work, they probably will stop. Some elderly parents have personality disorders that cause these behaviors, and it's not noticed many times until mom or dad or the other spouse passes away. There is information about this in a podcast from the Caring Generation. It's called My Mom is Crazy. It is a podcast of mine. And I interview Dr. Erlene Rosowski. She is an expert on late life personality disorders. She shares some very practical information about caring for elderly parents who have lifelong personality disorders and who we may view as difficult. I highly recommend that you listen to that podcast. On the other hand, if your parent is just difficult and they don't have a personality disorder, no good will result from arguing with them. What you want to do is let mom or dad know that you'll be available when they are ready to receive help, to make a change, or to work toward solutions, because what we don't want to focus on are the problems. Caregivers can fall into similar traps as aging parents and think, "Oh, poor me." How do we help elderly parents and family members or ourselves move from this feeling of, "Oh, poor me, I'm feeling helpless," to feeling hopeful? We want to end the blame game. It's easy when events happen to blame others or even blame ourselves. Instead of saying to an elderly parent, "You make me feel bad," which is a blaming statement, all you have to do is say, "Mom, I feel bad when you say those things to me. I feel bad when you treat me like that. I feel bad when you're not appreciative." This response shifts that conversation from blaming somebody else to us taking control and responsibility for the way that we feel. If we're the one that feels helpless, we can think that by stating our feelings, we can hurt the feelings of a parent. That's not what this is about. That's about shrinking from conflict. It's okay to say how we feel as long as we're posing it in a way that says, I feel bad, not you make me feel this way. Shrinking away from family conflict can make us as caregivers feel much more powerless, insecure, less confident. We as caregivers have the right to be compassionate to ourselves, the right to tell others how we feel based on the situations or the actions of another person. And learning how to have these conversations can actually surprise family members, but they can be very, very positive. Just to go over this again, it's saying, Mom, when you say that, you hurt my feelings. Having these types of honest conversations ends that poor me thinking that got us to this place in the first point, and it'll help us feel more confident about responding to difficult situations with elderly parents. Let's talk about another situation where we may unknowingly allow ourselves to fall into another type of parent or family trap. Triangulation. How many of you know what triangulation means? Triangulation, if you think of it like a triangle, it happens when one person, usually an elderly parent, speaks to one child about another child who's not present. An example would be your mom asking you about what your brother or sister or another person thinks about something. Your mother may talk negatively about your brother or sister to you, but not say things directly to that person. These types of conversations should make us feel uncomfortable. We should not participate in them. Triangulation shows disrespect. It divides families. Triangulation happens everywhere, including the workplace. In the workplace, it looks like this. If you have a conversation with a colleague about another person who's not present, you are triangulating. Why is this harmful? If you participate in that discussion in the workplace and you speak for somebody who's not present, you might be giving inaccurate information about that person, their actions, their intentions, or their opinions, and that could cause somebody else to have false beliefs about the person, think that the person is a bad person. Triangulation is a behavior of people who want to pit one person against another person and who want to cause a lot of drama in situations. In any of these situations, whether it's a conversation with an elderly parent, someone at work, why not do this? Pick up the phone, call the person, or go find the person. Invite that person who is not present to join the conversation, show that he or she can speak. You can stop that conversation and say, Mom, why don't I call Becky? We'll get Becky on the phone and we'll have her answer your questions. Or if you're in the workplace, stop conversation, say, well, let me go get John. I'll bring John back and let's have this conversation together. I would feel much better about that. Stopping a conversation that involves triangulation is the best way to show respect for other people. Triangulation is such a bad habit because most people don't even realize they do it. They don't realize that they're talking about others. They don't realize the unintentional problems that they cause by participating in this pitting one person against another situation or just saying bad things about other people. Here's how to change the habit of triangulation and show respect for another person. And we'll go into this in a little bit more detail. Mom asks you about your sister who's not present. This is how you respond. Mom, Julie isn't here. If you want the answer to your question, let's call Julie on the phone and ask her. I'm uncomfortable speaking for her. I don't know how Julie would respond to that question, and I don't want to guess. We can learn to have these conversations with everyone in our life because the more that we divert these types of conversations, the easier it is to show respect for others, to have respectful conversations for others, and the easier it is to avoid miscommunication. gossip, triangulation, situations that go bad. Many times we are the unintentional cause of these situations, and it's unnecessary. We can stop it. An elderly parent or another family member may be really good at attention seeking, and you may not realize what attention seeking is. It's very common in caregiving situations. Think of this. How many times have you received a call about some disaster that turned out to be less than a disaster? At that particular time, it could have been mom, dad, brother, or sister. They wanted your attention now. And so a bigger than life story was told to get your attention. Sometimes it happens with a person calling and leaving a message on your voicemail saying, "John, we need to talk about the situation. Call me as soon as possible." Now, that person could have been respectful and outlined what the situation was in the phone call so that you're not worrying. But just the idea of that unknown situation can upset us, raise our blood pressure, make us worry. Sometimes it's nothing to worry about, but the person who left that message is trying to manipulate you or get your attention so that you call them back right away. When mom or dad repeatedly do this or they complain about a situation, what you can say is, if you have a concern, leave me a voicemail, but leave me all the details so that I can call you back and we can solve this problem together. Or if mom or dad complain a lot, you can say, "Mom, I hear you complain about this time after time. What steps do you plan to change the situation to make it better so that you don't keep complaining?" By asking for ideas, you may eventually help an elderly parent realize that they have choices to make. They don't have to feel powerless, hopeless, or helpless. They can make a choice. They can choose to solve a problem. In some of these situations, the other person, mom, dad, somebody at work, they don't really want your advice and they really don't want a solution. All they want to do is vent, which is not good for you because it upsets you. Notice when people come to you to express problems and see if they're asking for your opinion. This is a way to end the drama. It's a way to end the venting. You can simply say to them, "Are you coming to me to vent, or are you coming to me with a problem and a solution so that we can talk about it and see what might work out?" You don't want to really promote venting. And it's not that you don't want people to express their frustrations or opinions or ideas. If someone is going to vent, you also want to have them do the other thing, which is express a solution or say, "This is what I'm thinking of doing about this. What do you think about that?" So in a sense, they're giving you a problem, they are stating a solution, and they're asking you for your input about the solution. This is how to manage the beginning situations of when families don't get along, when we come back together to care for elderly parents. We have to learn how to communicate with each other again because we've been apart for a long time, or maybe we haven't been in situations where there were problems, so we don't know how to communicate through problem situations. Let's talk about a summary of this situation. So, gaining insight into personal relationships, it can definitely help us change our responses to care situations. We have to end triangulation. It is a family way to bring conflict in, to bring drama in. All know family situations, there can be enough drama. There can be enough disagreement. Put children together, put elderly parents together, we can have a lot of uproar. We want to be able to reduce that to a point that is manageable so that we can be more fact-based, less emotional, and to respond positively to situations in thinking about the problem, the solution, and how we can all work together. I'm Pamela D Wilson. Thank you for joining me for this part. I will see you in another webinar.